levels, internet use, and regular news watching impact a person's support for democracy. For this assignment, I selected questions from the 2006 to 2007 Arab Barometer and focused only on the input of Yemeni respondents who constituted an overall sample size of 1,182. Tests that I use are liability analysis, cross-tabulation, Kendall's Tau, C, chi-squared, and ANOVA. My hypotheses are as follows. First, the more a person uses the internet, the more likely it is for him or her to support democracy. Second, regular exposure to news increases a person's support for democracy. Finally, higher levels of education increase a person's support for democracy. Overall, I base my hypotheses on a number of scholarly articles. Christopher Kedzie, for example, uses his dictator's dilemma to argue that globalization, largely facilitated by the internet, enables the passage of democratic information. So I also referred to Dahlgren and Sparks' book, wherein they argued that the news media manages the space between government and the governed and is central to the political process whose primary raison d'etre is freedom, as in freedom of expression, association, and movement. Lastly, I based my third hypothesis on Seymour Lisbeth's own hypothesis, which states that the more well-to-do a nation, not only in terms of economic development, but in human capital like education as well, the greater the chances it will sustain a democracy. Thus, the three indicators I chose were survey questions that asked respondents about their opinions on democracy's impact on the economy and whether political contestation is important and if democracy is better than any other form of government. The alpha score of my index garnered was 0.6288, which meant that my index was reliably measuring the concept of support for democracy in Yemen. Moreover, my standardized alpha score was 0.6273, which is very close to Cronbach's alpha score, thereby reinforcing the reliability of my index. Since my alpha of 0.6288 was higher than the 0.60 threshold value, I ultimately decided to make no changes to my index. Frequency distribution of my index garnered a mean of 2.055, which meant that the average number of Yemeni respondents were moderately supportive of democracy. Skewness of negative 0.095 meant that the mean or average number of respondents fell slightly left off the peak. The fact that both the mode and median, which were 2, was less than the mean, reflected a small measurement of skewness. Finally, the standard deviation of 0.023 simply measures the movement between values, or how much each score differs from the mean. In this case, there's a movement of 0.023 between the values. These are the results of the cross-tabulation between my y variable, aka support democracy, and my first x variable, internet use. The fact that my p-value, or chi-square, was measured at 0 meant that the observed mean differences were very unlikely to have arisen by chance, thereby providing evidence against the null hypothesis. Even though my x variable measuring internet use only had 2 values, I nonetheless decided to use ANOVA. And I found that respondents in not at all category differed very significantly from those in the at least once a year category. Furthermore, because all variables were ordinal and the table resembled a rectangle, I decided to use Kendall's Tau C to measure the association. I got a Tau C of 0.07163, which meant that there was a very weak but positive association between my variables. All in all, my hypothesis that the more a person uses the internet, the more likely it is for him or her to support democracy was not supported. These are the results of the cross-tabulation between my y variable and my second x variable, news watching. The fact that my chi-square was measured at 0 meant that the differences in the dependent variable, aka democracy, across the categories of the independent variable, aka news, were very unlikely to be due to a sampling error. In order to get a more detailed assessment, I ended up both using the Sheffy test and ANOVA, and as a result, I found that those in the never category differed significantly from the rest. Furthermore, because all variables were once again all ordinal and the table resembled a rectangle, I decided to use Kendall's Tau C to measure association. I ultimately got a Tau C of 0.09610, which meant that there was a very weak positive association between my variables. Thus, my hypothesis was not supported. As for the cross-tabulation between my y variable and my third x variable, level of education, I once again got a p-value of 0. This meant that there was less than 1 in 1,000 chances that the observed mean difference in support for democracy were due to a sampling error. In order to get a more detailed assessment, I ended up using the Sheffy test and ANOVA. I found that while both elementary/primary educated respondents and illiterate respondents significantly differed from the rest, respondents who fell under the literate category differed the most. As for the measure of association, I got a Tau C of negative 0.1550, which meant that there was a weak negative association between my variables. The fact that it was negative suggested not very convincingly that the higher person's level of education, the less likely it is for him or her to support democracy. All in all, my hypothesis that higher levels of education increase a person's support for democracy was not sufficiently supported. Thus, to sum up my findings, I found that the person's internet use, news viewership, and level of education do not determine his or her level of support for democracy. As you can see, not one hypothesis was sufficiently supported. However, it must be noted that every single one was statistically significant. The 3 chi-squares of 0 indicated there was a 1 in 1,000 chance that these relationships were due to a sampling error. Despite the weak relationship between support for democracy and internet use in Yemen, I believe that there are still some areas in need of further research. For example, the Arab Barometer data shows that 67.8% of Yemeni respondents don't use the internet. According to the 2004 to 2005 study conducted by OpenNet Initiative, this may be attributable to systematic internet filtering by the government and the generally underdeveloped information technology structure in Yemen. As for the relationship between support for democracy and time spent watching news, it should be noted that the state operates the Yemeni Radio and TV Corporation, and there is no law permitting domestic broadcasting. Lastly, as for the relationship between democracy and level of education, I believe that there are other factors that need further research as well. For example, the World Bank states that aside from the lack of gender equity in schools, deep and general poverty is also seen to be an obstacle to access to education in Yemen. And now that is it for my presentation. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you all have a wonderful day.